But the kind of black magic we're talking about, which we spoke of at the beginning of the show, was of a frequency nature, of a way that it can also influence mass amounts of people. And I think that's the spell, and it really is a magician's spell that we found the human race to be under right now.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome my good friend, Brad Olsen, to Exopolitics Today. Well, welcome, Brad.
Well, thank you for having me on, Michael. It's always a real pleasure to speak with you.
Yeah, well, we've known each other for a few years now and done a number of conferences together. And I think we met at a shooting of Ancient Aliens and got to talk. And I was always fascinated by your interest in the esoteric topics. And of course, you've got a bunch of books that dealing with the esoteric and magic and Luciferianism, Illuminati, and so forth. But I thought maybe just to start this interview, you've really established a reputation in terms of being both an author and a publisher in looking at that intersection between magic, the global planetary control system, extraterrestrial life. So what were the key influences that shaped you in your journey into those topics?
I've always been interested in the unknown and the mysterious and the unexplained in the world. And certainly when you get into the black magic part of it, which for a long time I didn't really believe it, to be quite honest with you. But as I got more into the research about the control structure of the Earth and some of their mode of operation, going about what they do to have this very comprehensive control, similar to mind control over the whole world, it became very clear to me that they were using forces that were outside of our normal understanding of consciousness, and also delving into the extraterrestrial, which is something you and I are both very interested in understanding, the exopolitics of how this is relating to the human experience down here on Earth. And just by really compiling the work, and especially in the last book in the series Beyond Esoteric, Escaping Prison Planet, the subtitle is suggestive that we are in this matrix, that we are in this control grid, and looking at solutions, positive solutions for how we can escape, but also what it's all about and how they have gained this control over humanity.
Well, as you know, I'm very much interested in the extraterrestrial factor and exopolitics. So how did you get interested in extraterrestrial life and exopolitics?
It's funny, I was going through my childhood drawings, and I had this drawing, time I was about 10 years old, of a gray alien, but he was wearing like an Apollo 11 astronaut suit. And I remember I had really just been fascinated with that drawing I did of basically a big-headed, big-eyed alien, and I taped it to my little desk when I was a kid. And it was one of my favorite drawings. I'm an illustrator, and I've been drawing my whole life. And when I found it again, I was so glad I still kept it, because that told me that I was always interested in this subject, Michael. I've always felt that there was this kind of influence in the world. And while this picture was kind of a malevolent, mean-looking gray, and I suppose they kind of are in our interpretation of their motives, coming to understand that there is also a benevolent force. But my interest really has spanned my entire life, just thinking that there has to be this greater force, has some kind of influence over humanity. And what is that was always my question, because I've always thought we should be living in a utopia world right now. Why is it that there's hunger and so much deprivation to the human race? Why can't we get it together? And then tying this in with the elites and how they have been controlling the world. I call them cutouts in my book, these humans that are also interceding with some of these malevolent ETs and their influence over all the rest of us. So just trying to really pine down to get to the real meat of the matter as to why it is we are not living on a utopia world right now.
Yeah, we're definitely not living in a utopian society at all. But, we're doing our best to change that. Well, I remember when I got started in this field back around 2001, after watching Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project, I read a couple of books by Jim Marrs, his book Ruled by Secrecy, and William Bramley's Gods of Eden. And they were really great books. And they talked about a planetary control system that has these rulers operating behind the scenes where they manipulate wars, famine, poverty, and that they're connected to these ruling bloodline families. And that this goes back, not just centuries, but millennia. And both of them, Bramley and Jim Marrs, connected this to extraterrestrial life. So did you come across these books? What was your impression in reading them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And also Jim Marrs' Alien Agenda book, very influential. I got a great opportunity to hang out with him at Contact in the Desert one night, just talking about things, and Laura Eisenhower was there and a few other speakers. He was such a great guy, so down to earth. You could ask him anything and he'd give you this folksy answer. But to your question, this control grid of this global elite having this interaction, or I really think that they were taking their marching orders from these malevolent ETs. And another commonality in a lot of these books, Michael, is that there was this way that ETs could only really interact if they were brought in or asked or from behind the scenes, similar to the prime directive we heard about in Star Trek. So some of these authors and my own research going into this is, well, then how could it be that these malevolent ETs are allowed to comprehend or to operate here on Earth? And my conclusion is they've always been here and they are of the Earth itself. Well, just in the same way that whenever we hear about extraterrestrials or some of these new TikTok videos or things that are coming out, we're always saying, oh, look to the skies. They're going to come from other worlds and come down here. And maybe we should be afraid, or maybe they'll be our friend. What about right here on planet Earth? What about right below our feet, the inner terrestrials? And then when you get into the abilities some of them have as ultra terrestrials coming in and out of our reality. And this is what I think is going on with some of these very dark occultic meetings that the elite are having, that they can appear and they can manifest and they can come in and out of our third dimensional reality. And we've heard so much about gray aliens being able to walk right through walls and things like this. Well, we can't even wrap our heads around that. We can't even conceive to know what an inner terrestrial or an ultra terrestrial is with these kind of abilities, unless we go into the exopolitics of it all. And when you do, boy, do you start peeling the levels of the onion off and really creating more questions than answers sometimes when you get deep down into some of the abilities of these extraterrestrials. And I think the global elite had this ability to communicate and to also intercede with them.
Yeah, just in exploring the origins of this connection between global leaders, uh, black magic, and extraterrestrial life. I know in Bramley and Jim Ma's books, they mention the Book of Enoch. And in the Book of Enoch, as I'm sure you know, I mean, you have 200 fallen angels landing in the Mount Hermon area of modern day Palestine, Jordan, and Syria. And they land there, and of course they interbreed with the humans, with the daughters of man. They interbreed and they create this race of giants, the Nephilim, who become like the rulers of the planet. And so, we get the stories of the giants, but the fallen angels were there behind the scenes in terms of like having created all of this. And I know in reading the Book of Enoch, it talks about the war between the fallen angels and the righteous angels. And in the fallen angels led by Semjaza, they were accused of essentially teaching black magic and releasing advanced technologies to humanity when they weren't ready for it. And that this was part of the war that took place as depicted in the Book of Enoch. So, what do you know about that, the Book of Enoch, and this intersection between those, the magic, the extraterrestrial, and global control?
Well, of course, we know that when the Bible went through its editing process at the Council of Nicaea, the Book of Enoch was extracted and not included in the Holy Bible as we know it today in the Western world, but it can be found in the Gnostic traditions and elsewhere. Speaking of these giants on Earth, as you know, Michael, in my book, I have the human origins that has been suppressed, including knowledge of the giants, where these massive headed, cone head out the back, 30% larger cranial capacity skulls have been found around the world, most predominantly down in South America in the Sacred Valley, where you have the highest concentration of megaliths in the world, which are still big question how they were able to build on such a scale, but also in the Black Sea region near Europe and Asia, and even here in North America in some of our mound sites. Another book I did called Sacred Places North America chronicles quite a few sites where these giants have been found, including in mummified form, like in the Lovelock Caves in Nevada and Spirit Cave. So these Nephilim who came down with this black magic that humans knew nothing about, think about how disadvantaged we are when somebody comes in with high technology or something like black magic, occult, and we don't know anything about it. We can't compete with that. You can't possibly think that you're going to win a war with slingshots against laser beams. I mean, it's just so one-sided. And I think this is how disadvantaged humans have been from the get-go, from the time these Nephilim came down to Earth. And they are very much in the fossil record as having existed at one time. So we have to include this into this big jigsaw puzzle of exopolitics that we're speaking of, because they did play a role. And it's a pretty good chance that even some of these large elongated skulls, there's pictures emerging that they're bankers in Europe and elsewhere, they're still alive. They like to keep a low profile, or maybe wear a fish hat if they're in the Vatican, but they disguise themselves, but they look very much human-like, but they're not quite human. And so then that begs the question, who exactly are they? And I think the Book of Enoch spells it out quite clearly, who and where they come from.
So when we're talking about black magic and extraterrestrials, what are we talking about? Are we talking about them having access to some kind of hidden technology, or is it kind of like the way we, as children saw magic, where people would say, various words and there'd be magical spells cast? Or what I think is probably closer to the truth is that the extraterrestrials that arrived knew about frequencies. They knew about audible frequencies. They knew about electronic frequencies. They knew about harmonic frequencies that could be used to levitate objects, to be able to incapacitate people. And so, I mean, for the ancients, when the fallen angels show up and they have this advanced knowledge where, you know what kind of frequency needs to be uttered, whether it's through technology or whether it's some sort of special auditory abilities you've developed, what frequencies need to be uttered to just incapacitate a person, where a person just freezes, for example. And so, I mean, for the ancients, it must have been a terrifying thing to kind of come across these fallen angels that had, what they regarded as like magic or occult powers. But I think ultimately, if we're trying to understand, what is magic, how does it connect to extraterrestrials, doesn't it ultimately boil down to just a superior knowledge of frequencies and how to use and manipulate those frequencies for controlling the natural environment and others?
Such a great point. And many things you just said there certainly require additional input. So for example, frequencies on what we hear of as shape-shifting, we would think that they take on a different appearance. But if the frequency changes, perhaps they are still who and what they are, but we're just seeing it differently. I think that's a big part of it. As far as frequency itself, think about Dr. Emoto out of Japan with his studies in cymatics, that sound and frequency can very much create patterns. So you put sand on a little frequency board and change the different sound and frequency, and you'll get these beautiful mandala patterns that emerge. Interesting that we see those same patterns in the Far East in mandala displays and other references to these beautiful patterns. Similarly, if you put your negative energy into, Dr. Emoto was using water and saying, oh, you're polluted, you're bad for me, you're ugly, you're dirty. Those cells will change to being very chaotic looking. And similarly, if you do it with a loving vibration and say, oh, water, you nourish me, you're so good for me, you're beautiful, then they become like a snowflake, these beautiful patterns. So our ability to intercede on this level is very much part of this whole possibility of us working with some of these ETs. Now, for someone like you and I, Michael, we're mostly secular. I mean, we're both spiritual people, and but in our own way, right? It's individual, like our own thumbprint. Now, let me just make a little example here. Let's just say you and I were invited to go to an occultist type of ceremony, right? And we're both kind of standing in the back row like, yeah, right, what is this all about? And they're taking it very, very seriously, and they're looking out at us, and we're in the back just watching this whole thing transpire. But at the same time, something starts to manifest in the room, and we see it with our own eyes. And if that were happening, we would suddenly start to think, wow, maybe there really is something here, and maybe there is something going on with on this level. I'm trying to flip to a page where I show an Illuminati ritual taking place with all of them standing around this room. My point of this is, if we were to witness it with our own eyes, we would quickly become a believer, and we would probably go into the fold of this group. In my research, finding out how they have gotten into the higher rankings of our politics, well, we were all seeing how the honeypots and all the other things were used to blackmail. But even more than that is they have what's known as shadowing, that when you do join these groups, there will be some of these entities, which for the most part cannot be seen by everybody else. Once again, it's like the frequencies or the shape shifting. But there are all these weird pictures in Washington, D.C. of entities coming down with wings, with different light beams into houses. Maybe there's some kind of occult ritual going on there. But then when you do become part of this group, you are then shadowed. So what it is that you want to do in your life, if it's to win an election, if it is to get rich, if it is to be CEO in a corporation, these entities are going to help you in the background. And I think that's part of how they have consolidated so much control in so few, is they have used these black magic rituals where sometimes entities will even come right back down. And you mentioned in the whole context of magic, well, that too. What if they were to come down having some kind of ritual, and there are these little entities, grays as we know them, are ultra-terrestrial and come in and do what they're said to do. And we've heard all the way back through Aleister Crowley and others how they were able to summon these entities. Aleister Crowley named his lamb Lam, and he had a great big head and just looked like a gray alien. So they can come into our reality and make a non-believer a believer real quick. And if you were promised everything you ever wanted in life, or you thought that that's what really mattered, you could see how people could be brought into the fold in this way.
Well, you wrote this 3-volume set of books called the Esoteric series. And, you know, you're looking at all of these topics. And of course, I know the last in the series, I actually just wrote a comment that was included in that. But I thought they were very good in terms of just outlining this connection between those topics: magic, extraterrestrial life, planetary control. So, you know, what was it that got you to kind of like start working on that book series?
Well, it's similar to what I said in the setup. I was just always interested in why we are not moving towards this Star Trek future. Why is it that we're not going out and exploring the cosmos? We have the technology. Humans are very clever. We can do these things. We just have to have a collective agreement. So all the while, there have been these roadblocks, as we know. Resources are all of a sudden very scarce. We can't feed the world. We can't get people the things they need. So this was just always in my mind that there has to be a better way. There has to be a way that we can figure out how we can move towards this Star Trek future, which, by the way, was Gene Roddenberry. And I know you've written about this too, Michael, working with the Council of Nine and looking at where humanity was going to be in 350 years. Now it's only 300 years. But if we have that technology now, Michael, and I do believe in your research and mine and the Secret Space Program and the Breakaway Civilization, that we have a Star Trek future right now, but it's being robbed from us. It's being denied to the regular people, but being used in some of these programs. So it's all about equality and bringing the human race up to this level of entering a golden age. And that is the prophecy of humanity right now. So in my little way of contributing with these books and helping people understand the dilemma we're in and what those roadblocks are, it's just my contribution and yours with Exopolitics and helping people understand this.
Yeah, I think that's very important what you just said about the roadblocks to this Star Trek future, that the controllers have been doing this for a long time. And, you know, of course, you know, people forget, you know, in 1972, when you had the, what was it, Apollo 14, if that was the last of the Apollo missions, or was it 15? I can't remember which one. But when they ended the Apollo program in 1972, you know, people assumed that, well, next would be Mars and we would just kind of like expand out into the solar system. But of course, everything went black. I mean, nothing happened. Of course, we know there was a lot happening behind the scenes in the secret space programs, all sorts of missions, all sorts of deals being done. But as far as the population was concerned, that was it. It was like, that's nearly 50 years ago now that the last Apollo mission went up there. And it's like in that 50 years, what's happened is exactly what you described. There was this massive roadblock put in place for this Star Trek future, and nothing was allowed to develop as far as the human population was concerned. And I think there's two levels to that. One was the technological. So of course, we're denied anti-gravity, we're denied kind of like free energy, we're denied kind of like alternative health, because if you're going to go into space, you need to have advanced health technologies. You can't go up there and take these pharmaceuticals. I mean, that's ridiculous. You need to have like med beds, or like we saw in the Star Trek series, electromagnetic healing frequencies. Robert Becker's book, what was it, the Body Electric? I mean, that just outlines how the body can be cured through electromagnetic frequencies, but all of that was stopped. Yeah. All of that was stopped, and that was this roadblock to this Star Trek future. So there was the technology block, but there was also the consciousness block, because it meant that we would be fixated on Earth and the problems of Earth rather than being out in space and expanding our consciousness, thinking about, well, what's going on out on the moon or on Mars, or out, what about all of these incredible ancient artifacts that are found all over the place on the moon or on Mars or on Ganymede and so on and so on. So I think, and that was to really keep our consciousness from expanding so that they could continue to control us through their things. So yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, well I mean, I guess I just, invite you to kind of comment on that.
You nailed it, Michael. Keeping us in a box, keeping our information very limited, making us think that we live in a planet of scarcity, making us think that there's no such thing as free energy, even though Tesla was doing the Wardenclyffe experiments 100 years ago and showing that it really was. And by the way, they're reproducing the Wardenclyffe Tower, I think in Texas now, and it's showing good early response that it is going to work in the way that he had it. So can you imagine, had we not had these roadblocks putting up all the free energy stops? JP Morgan pulled the plug on Tesla in the Wardenclyffe Tower when he went to view his investment, and he said, well, where's the switch? Where's the meter? How are we going to tax this thing? And Tesla, being as benevolent as he was, he said, there is no meter. We're just going to broadcast it out, and planes and boats and automobiles would be able to pick up this free energy and not ever have to refuel. Can you imagine the state of the atmosphere and what we've done with all the pollution in the last 100 years? So that's why they have to keep us in a box. That's why they have to ridicule and go after these free energy inventors. And there have been many since Tesla who have been utterly suppressed. I have a chapter in Future Esoteric about free energy and go into the dozens of different inventors, oftentimes using the same technique of rotating magnets and having them stop suddenly, and charge will then fill a battery pack or be released that is more than what went into starting the magnets rotating. So there are different inventors at different times that find the same thing. Motors that run on water, which converts to hydrogen, and many other inventions. There's even a commune in Switzerland that has a free energy device for decades. Why aren't we studying that? Why aren't we going there with our engineers today and replicating these things? Because we have intentionally been kept in this information box where the workings of the world and of exopolitics are just resigned to the fringe, and people like you and I, who very much want to see this world a better place, are not given, at least in the mainstream, an opportunity to help people understand some of these sometimes thorny issues, but once we unpack them and talk about them in an articulate way, it's really not that difficult to understand. It's just we haven't been given the opportunity to understand it from the time we're youngsters. Just in the same way you mentioned energy in ourselves, body electric. What if we were learning from the time we were little kids, going to kindergarten and starting to understand the chakras? And then in first grade, we start remote viewing and we're out there on Mars and we can see all these things. And then in second grade, we're using a telepathy amongst each other. And in third grade, we're learning telekinesis. I do believe this is how the benevolent ETs are able to get better every single generation. As Alex Collier says, that it is a law. It is the laws of consistency that you always give to the next generation everything you've got, that there are no secrets anymore. There is nothing to hide, but we just consistently give everything to the next generation who makes their own breakthroughs and gives that to the next generation. So that's the utopia planet that I foresee. If we're going to make this in the long term into a golden age, this is what we're going to have to embrace, is this knowledge to all. And there are no us and them anymore. We are the human race and we take care of each other.
Just in terms of getting through the roadblocks to this Star Trek future, I mean, I've been, for the last couple of years now, been working quite a bit on this Star Trek future that we're moving towards. And my 2021 book, Space Force, Our Star Trek Future, kind of like deals with that specific issue. One of the things that I found fascinating is that what has really propelled us forward in going down this Star Trek future is something called the Artemis Accords, a bilateral set of agreements that the US has reached with a number of countries. I think there's around 14 countries now that are formally signed on to the Artemis Accords, which are bilateral agreements. But the name itself, the Artemis Accords, was very, very interesting. The NASA administrator, Jim Bridenstine, who like really oversaw this, as part of this kind of initiative to restart this Star Trek future, to get us going down this path. I think that the term itself, Artemis, is very interesting because, of course, you had the Orion project, which was what the deep state wanted to do in terms of future moon landings and so forth. They had the Orion project, and going back to Greek mythology, Orion was this rapacious hunter. But then you got, and of course, the constellation Orion, where you have the belt of Orion, very significant in terms of the occult, and some of the different ET groups that come here. But then you have like Artemis, who is the goddess of the woods, and she slays Orion. So, it seems to me almost like there's echoes here of like black magic and white magic. Any comment?
Well, I love it when the symbology makes its way out, and it's so subtle that you have to kind of read between the lines to get it. Yeah, Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, a female coming in and slaying the Orion group, which is where we understand some of these malevolent ETs come from, the Draconian and Greys in our universe, in this part of the galaxy. It's a very dangerous and dark place, and that does seem to be their base of operation for expanding out. Much like parasites and coming to a planet like Earth, you can see many thousands of years ago when we were very vulnerable and our population was very low and could be manipulated quite easily. But now as so many people start to wake up and understand all this, it's coming quite clear that we have been manipulated on a wholesale level and basically sold out by some of these cutouts who worked with these ET forces. And I did finally find that picture of this Illuminati. I'm sure you've seen this image. It's quite famous, where they could conjure up some of these entities. You call it, and they will sometimes come to show themselves. And when you see it, then you know it, and then you're part of it. So I think this is how they have captured these human cutouts to be part of this global plan. And now we see it manifesting itself quite out there on a global way. And I think it all keys down to this black magic type of invocation to bring these entities into this grand plan. Or maybe it's the entities that is these malevolent ETs, this Orion group, that is the ones enforcing their will on us. But the rest of us, we see things in plain sight. We've heard that term before, hidden in plain sight. That there has to be some kind of revelation on the part of these malevolent ETs so that our free will is not completely infringed upon, that we do have a choice to either, oh, I saw it on a movie or a TV show or a billboard, I just ignore it. That's just blah, blah, blah. We don't believe it, but we've been seeing it. So in that regard, they do show themselves. And my next presentation I'm working on for next year is called The Hidden Esoteric in Plain Sight. And I'll tell you, Michael, when I started working on this, I found it is so pervasive and so invasive into our lives. It is just everywhere, but people either willfully choose not to see it, or when you do see it, you can't unsee it. It is kind of like the magician's trick when they pull the rabbit out of the sleeve. And let's just be really clear on our terms here, that kind of stage magic, well, that's all make-believe, of course. It's all an illusionary trick. But once you see how they do it, you'll never unsee how they do it. So if you came back the next night and saw the same trick, you'd see them do it again. But the kind of black magic we're talking about, which we spoke of at the beginning of the show, was of a frequency nature, of a way that it can also influence mass amounts of people. And I think that's the spell. And it really is a magician's spell that we found the human race to be under right now.
Yeah, that's very important, that that spell and the control the leaders have exercised through their knowledge of magic or black magic. There's a quote that I cited in one of my recent articles from your book, Beyond Esoteric. And I just want to read that out and then get you to kind of maybe elaborate on that. So this is what you say in the book, Beyond Esoteric, on page 55. You say, there is a complete control over the human race, and to think that black magic could be used to control the masses is disturbing. The occult is employed in a new kind of fascism today among some of the elite globalists who completely control almost every aspect of our lives, from health and finance to politics and education. Research indicates that occult ceremonies and rituals at the upper levels go far beyond what anyone can imagine. Why is it so hard to believe that occult practices are a real tool for control? So yeah, just to elaborate on that.
Yeah, that is in the neo-fascism section, and the second chapter called The Occult and Fascism that you just quoted from. And here we are. This is the global elite existing, whether it be aristocracy in ancient Greece and Rome, the Church of the Middle Ages, and beyond, to the deep state politics of today. We see this control group, which has an iron grip on our consciousness, really. It gets to the point where they are very concerned about the narrative and how we think of things. And to do that, they have to use these various tools. And I'd just like to make a point that if you look at all the way back to Egypt, ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was considered a living god, and you treated him as such. He had a voice and an ear with the other gods in the pantheon in Egyptian mythology. But to them, back in that day, they were very much into pharaoh worship. Well, when Rome took over the Mediterranean basis, and this is all leading up to the Western civilization that we know of and we live in today, that the Caesar was considered a living god. Now, isn't it interesting that we have the Pope in Rome who also has an ear to God? So you can see how this control structure with the divine goes thousands of years back. It always incorporates a living human, but of a divine nature. And I think this is how they're one of the ways, just in the same way with the royal families in Europe, which of course had a big influence on Western civilization, and their what they call divine right to rule. Well, who gave them that right? and how did we all continue to go for it? So, and interestingly, you sometimes find elements of these elongated type people. Some of these controllers have different features than we do, sometimes even a little bigger eyes than we do, and so forth. And so you can see how this has been a very tightly knit group for a very long time. And the whole purpose was to control the rest of us, control us in a way that we would just go along with the program. We would believe their narrative. And by doing so, giving up our free will in many cases. But in the case of the divine right to rule and the kings, I mean, oftentimes it was with an iron fist or with a sword. But now we're starting to see through that. And I do believe with your articles, Michael, which have been very eye-opening, and try to read every one and watch your material, because this is really the cutting edge. This is when the pen is mightier than the sword. And when we can learn from each other and start to see through this without an overlaying agenda, then we start to get to the real meat of the matter, why Earth is not a utopia planet. And of course, the subtitle of Beyond Esoteric is Escaping Prison Planet, but I'm an optimistic person, and I think we shift this into a prism planet. And that is the great awakening for the rest of us. And that will be a glorious day. And I really hope to be alive to witness it. Maybe it's happening sooner than we think.
I remember one of the things that really kind of like gave me a clearer idea of what's going on in this whole extraterrestrial, black magic, global control system was a set of dialogues that appeared on the Above Top Secret Forum in October of 2008. It was called the Hidden Hand Dialogues. And apparently you had someone who claimed to be from one of the Illuminati bloodlines who said that he was a philosopher, that was his position within the Illuminati, that he was a philosopher. He was kind of like their ethics counselor, if you like. You know, what is it that a member of the Illuminati has to do in order to progress up the hierarchy, to ascend and so forth. So he was a philosopher, and he responded to people's questions, and he said something very interesting. He said that on the Earth is controlled by 13 ruling bloodlines. And then he said of those 13 bloodlines, 10 have off-world origins and only 3 are indigenous to Earth. So yeah, did you remember coming across that? What do you think of the Hidden Hand Dialogues?
Oh, that was absolute must read in 2008. I remember them well. I would like to review them again. They were so good. And the whole concept of the hidden hand, I think this goes back to Adam Smith, the economist in the 18th century, that wrote about the invisible hand, the way that they can manipulate things without us seeing them, but this is the way it goes. Adam Smith was talking about economics, the way that goods are bought, sold, and traded around the world. But the hidden hand, this goes more into, as it was known back then, the Illuminati. Now we call them the deep state or the Cabal, this group that controls the economic strings, that has a hand in some of this high technology, that may even be part of this breakaway civilization we hear of. And the rest of us are kind of getting in the way. That's why on the Georgia Guidestones, here we go, hidden in plain sight, keep the world population at 500 million. Well, that's about a 90% reduction. And I think those who are waking up is seeing how that's being done right now. But that's part of the hidden hand, is that they're doing these manipulations, sometimes hidden right there in plain sight, if you know what you're looking for. And when this came out in 2008, it was quite revealing that here's a philosopher, as you said, coming out and giving us the reason why they feel that this is justified to do this, whether it's because the planet is overpopulated in their eyes, or whether they think that resources are going to become really scarce to them, not to the rest of us. They've already done a good job of that. But also to give us an idea of how they may also be interceding with the ETs, these malevolent beings that also have their own control agenda. And that's what I really appreciate about your work, Michael, is you really get into the nuts and bolts about what it's all about. And that's what the word exopolitics means, is politics above the earth. Well, there's always going to be an agenda. There's always going to be the good guys, the bad guys, and the humans. If you have a say in the matter, most humans have no say in the matter, and we just go along with the agenda that's given to us. But I think that can change as we change our way of thinking. And that's what this philosopher of the hidden hand was projecting out there, that there's always a way that we can make a change if we know what we're up against and what we're dealing with. And up to this point, there really hasn't been much of an opportunity for any of us to really comprehend this giant morass we find ourselves in. But with works like yours, Michael, and helping people understand the exopolitics of it all, we do start to see the big picture. Like William Cooper said in his famous 1989 speech at the UFO Congress, you put the aliens in the middle of this stuff and you get all the answers. I mean, it's an oversimplified way of looking at it, but it's true that if you don't put the extraterrestrial question into this, you're not going to get a full picture about what's really going on here on Earth.
Yeah, that's very important, that we need to understand the role of extraterrestrials and how they are very much at the core of how the Illuminati operates. You mentioned earlier on how some of these Illuminati ceremonies summon these spirits. And of course, this is part of what a lot of people think of the occult and black magic, summoning demons. But what if what's happening is that they're opening up a portal to some extraterrestrial habitat, and some extraterrestrial comes through who, people that see that would be kind of shocked at some very powerful, malevolent extraterrestrial appearing at some ceremony, but yet for those observing it, it would be like, oh, that's a demon. But really, rather than thinking of it as a kind of demon, as a ethereal being that lives in some space outside of our physical reality, we're talking about an extraterrestrial being who, through technological means or through frequencies, understanding how occult ceremonies work, is able to manifest in our third density from wherever density or location they operate.
That's a great point. And so long through our history, we've been so very superstitious that we would just instantly have a knee-jerk reaction. That's demonic, and that's the devil, or that's all these labels that we ascribe to it. But now with the advancement of science, getting into cymatics and frequencies and dimensions, these ultra-terrestrials, which ultimately they are, even if they were originating here on planet Earth, still have abilities that go way beyond, at least in the last couple decades ago, our comprehension of how they appeared. And I think that's how they made their ways into our US military and elsewhere, that they had this ability to show this sense of wonderment, how they could appear, how they could fly these crafts, which used obviously anti-gravity or zero-point energy and technologies that went way beyond our comprehension. But now we're playing catch up. And now we're about there where we can understand them at their level. And isn't it interesting that it's like their power starts to evaporate? Once we know who they are, they're no longer these big bad monster demons anymore. And we better just submit and get on our knees. Oh Lord, please don't harm us. Well, now we know who they are and what they're doing. And so it gives the human race a much bigger advantage of competing with them, even technologically, to match them. The story of how the first UFOs came down because we were focusing our radar on them and taking down crafts in the 1940s doing that. There are ways that we can counter that, but they still do have an incredible advantage. Some of these malevolent ETs, like a Gray, being able to get in our minds and be telepathic. As I said, wouldn't it be great if we had learned this in second grade and we could have this dialogue back and forth with them? And I would like to think in future generations we can and we will. But at this very moment in time, we're still playing catch up, but at least we're starting to understand how they operate much more clearly.
Book series that you published through your company was authored by an Italian, Leo Zagami, and it's titled Confessions of an Illuminati. And he describes his history in terms of these different occult societies and black magic and what he encountered. So who is he and why did you decide to publish his books?
I remember watching Leo Lion Zagami videos when he was living in Italy, and he would do tours around Italy and show occult locations, and really was one of the first people to start blowing the whistle on the Vatican, the very top of the hierarchy, and some of the malicious things that they were up to. So I felt like he was a real freedom fighter. He was a real truth seeker, and he came out of these bloodline families, which is also very interesting. He's now in America. He's in California, and we just communicated over the holidays, wishing each other well. And I published through CCC Publishing, my book publishing business, 5 of his books, 3 in the Confessions of an Illuminati series, which was originally his video series. And this is when I was attracted to what he had to say. He also did a book about the last Pope, the prophecy of Saint Malachi, who said that this would be in the timeline all the way back from the Middle Ages, the period of the last Pope. And then his 5th book with CCC Publishing is called The Invisible Master. And this gets into a lot of the subjects that we've been talking about today, Michael, including how the elite have interceded with these malevolent ETs to really shore up their control base and basically do these agendas both on the human level and on the ET level. And I think he'd be a great guest for you to have on because he goes into the real dark magic ritual part of all this. So I learned quite a bit through his books and being an editor and writing the foreword to The Last Pope to understand these subjects. I don't necessarily seek them out. I don't play with a Ouija board or do these things, but I understand that they have power and meaning behind them. So I look at, what if there was white magic? What if there were ways that we could use some of this and turn it on to the dark magic? And part of that is just being able to understand what they're up to and how we can counter it with our own minds, with just an understanding, or our consciousness can really have a big difference in the measurement of how effective this control grid is over us. But Leo Zagami is a fascinating figure. I know him and his wife, and they're great. And he's doing other books on his own, and encourage him to do so. And he's getting it out there too, but he has made some powerful enemies in the world, and he can't even go back to Italy right now. So hopefully things go good here in America for him, and wish to keep him around. And I think he'd really be a great guest for you to have on your show as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely think about that. So you mentioned white magic. So again, you want to just explain what is it? What is white magic? Are we talking about technology? Are we talking about an understanding of frequencies and resonance, or is it the ability to manifest? By having a positive vision. Like Greg Braden's book, the Isaiah, the Isaiah Effect, just to manifest something, to have it clearly in your mind and just focus on that and make it real. I mean, so yeah, what is white magic?
I did another book with another author named Lon Milo Duquette, and he did a book called The Key to Solomon's Key. And this was back in the early 2000s. I was first acquainted with his book, and at that time I didn't believe this stuff. I took it on good faith that this was a good book, and it turned out it very much was. And I call him the White Wizard, based on his using white magic instead of dark magic. So I think the defining feature is, first of all, it's all those things you just described. It's using whatever tools you can, but also having a knowledge of frequency and how our mind works, which is also on a frequency basis. But if you can transmute this or invert it back, so you look at the black magic, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to be a part of that. I'm a positive person. I want to see change for the better, but maybe I can use my consciousness as a way to invert, or at least see what is there hidden in plain sight and be able to identify it, and also to do what's best for my body. I mean, at this point, I think we're in a self-defensive mode, and we have to do things to protect ourselves because it's coming on us full board. So part of the white magic is being a master, to co-create your own reality, co-create heaven on earth. And that is where the Buddha and Jesus Christ were masters of this kind of white magic, of using it in such a way that they were bettering themselves, and that they could also pass it on to their followers. And I have this great book called Buddha and Jesus, The Parallel Teachings. And it's amazing how similar what they both said in different ways. But the truth is always a constant pillar in the universe. It always is. It can be wrapped up in disinformation, put on it, and lipstick on the pig, however you want to call it. But when, at the end of the day, when that all falls away, the pillar of truth is still there. And that is what we seek. And to me, that is the white magic, is seeking that core truth in the world. And it helps me as a person individually. And I think it would help others too, to understand all these trappings in the world that we're exposed to, and how we can step away from it and increase our own human abilities. And it's all there for us if we seek it out.
Yeah, I just published an interview I did with a French contactee, Jean-Charles Moyen, who says that he was taken on a Galactic Confederation craft, and they were doing things in terms of training themselves, or being trained to use telekinesis, telepathy and other skills. But what he described, some could say, well, that is white magic. So it's very interesting to see that this is, and you mentioned it earlier, that imagine if our children were trained to use this. Some would say, well, that's white magic. And so, yeah, that is a very powerful thing. Well, I wanted to kind of like start wrapping it up by looking at this article I put out on my website, a 2-part series where I talk about Cabal leaders go to Antarctica. And essentially, the information I was getting was that they were going there to bargain their exit, to leave Earth, to go to a new prison planet in what appears to be a reprise of the Book of Enoch. But now, they are the elite or the Cabal or the Illuminati, the top figures are leaving Earth to go to another place and start anew, where they take with them their knowledge and whatever tech they can carry through the Antarctic portal. And in exchange, they're supposed to surrender the keys and the codes for controlling the planet. So, and this was what apparently the Galactic Federation of Worlds and this organization, the Intergalactic Confederation, said that this was the deal that the Illuminati or the Cabal had to make, that, yeah, they could leave and go to this new prison planet where they start off again, but they have to surrender the keys and the codes for controlling the planet. So what is that? What keys and codes are we talking about?
I found that so fascinating, Michael. I actually read those 2-part articles twice and watched your video. I was just so fascinated with the whole concept of humanity getting the opportunity to unlock from this matrix, this mental control grid that we found ourselves under. And so many things are going to start coming out, which are going to be very shocking to a lot of the normies who have never paid any attention to all this. But to people like you and I, we've been talking about this, shouting from the mountain for the last decade or two, that this was a very real thing. And these keys and these codes, they're part of black magic spells to keep us all locked into, I would say it would tie into the mainstream media too, the way that they have been able to keep us entranced by the messaging, keeping us believing this certain narrative that has been pushed out on us. And look, a lot of people have fallen for it and will be quite upset to know how deep the manipulation and the lies have gone. But it's just got to be that way when this great awakening occurs. And if these different keys and codes were broken, the spell, which I think it's starting to happen right now, we're seeing the cracks already forming. But let's just say the mainstream media went on a completely different tangent, and everything that they had been reporting last week started changing into, well, there are some things we need to tell you about, that this is the way it's really been. That would have a huge impact. And I keep tying it to television because in the 1970s, Richard Nixon said the American people won't believe anything until they see it on TV. It has had a mesmerizing effect. We were talking about frequencies and vibration and how they interact in the human mind. Well, television does that. It very much puts people into a trance. And so when that spell is broken, when the television is either turned off, and I know you don't really watch much, and I certainly don't, that you start to see things for the way they really are, like the old William Blake quote, when the doors of perception are cleansed, you'll see things for the way they really are, and that is infinite. And so I think that's part of the mental control grid that we've been put under. That's what those keys and controls are. And when that starts to break down and fade away and flips over to the light side, to the white magic, and maybe using the word magic is a little not quite clear enough, but just to have the ability to see things for what they really are, that is when we will see a massive transformation in humanity. So I think those keys and codes were really a way of saying the control grid on the human consciousness, or the narrative, is breaking down. And once that converts over and goes back to what it really is, that pillar of truth, when we can really see it for what it is, yeah, there's going to be a lot of darkness, there's going to be a lot of deception that went into all that, but it will be a great day for humanity when we can start to finally see what has happened here on Earth. And I think that will give us a very meaningful interaction with the benevolent ETs that definitely want us to succeed and to see this on our own terms. When this control grid falls away, we will have a wonderful opportunity for humanity, for humanity's sake, of coming together and solving our problems. Perhaps they will help us in some ways, but really, and this is a question to you, Michael, don't you think it's coming to the point where humanity has to start to operate without the control, without these keys and all this stuff that has been laid upon us, this opportunity to start solving our own problems and doing what's right and helping the lesser fortunate among us? And by doing so, bringing up the whole vibration in this planet to the point where we can have a very meaningful interaction with the benevolent ETs.
Well, I go back to my own awakening, being red-pilled, if you like, back in 2001, when I saw the Disclosure Project press conference. And the thing that really I noticed shifted in me was that I no longer trusted what was coming through the mainstream media. And it seems that is the key for a lot of people, for the normies and for the awakening, is that when people no longer trust the information they're getting from the mainstream media, that's when the power of the Cabal, the Illuminati, collapses. Because you're absolutely right, the media is the principal way of controlling people, of maintaining this prison planet. And as soon as people no longer trust what they're reading, what they're hearing that's coming from the mainstream media, then I think the people start to awaken, because we all have, we are all like infinite souls, infinite consciousness, having this kind of unique bodily experience, this third density experience. And so we're kind of like cocooned, and and we are trained from a very early age to trust, trust your parents, trust your teachers, trust the police, trust the authorities. And so you go through life like that, and you trust. And then you get to this situation where people are doing, this kind of stuff, and all sorts of bad things are happening. And it's like, well, you got to stop trusting, and you got to start thinking critically about what's going on. And it's, for some people, it's a tremendous leap. It's a scary thing to stop trusting those around you, those authority figures that you've idolized all your life, whether it's in government, whether it's the movie industry, whether it's religious leaders, whoever it is, that you just trust them and you give up your power. And this is the key for the awakening. So for me, the keys and the codes and giving those up would be kind of like, maybe getting the media to confess. And we're kind of seeing some of that, with CNN now, with, some of the, what was it, Chris Cuomo, him like having to resign under scandal. And so there's some accountability happening now in the mass media, but it'll take a lot more of it. But yeah, that's definitely, I think, a big way that we're going to free ourselves. So I wanted to kind of like just bring it to an end, to just ask you, people want to find out more about what you're doing and what you're writing about, what your future projects involve, where do they go?
So if you want to know more about me, what I'm up to, my projects, where I'm speaking at conferences in 2022, bradolsen.com is the website. to go and see my books, including the new Beyond Esoteric and Leo Zagami books, Lon Milo Duquette at cccpublishing.com. And for my books that are sold over that website, I can sign copies for people that are going out. And yeah, just a way to interact with the public. Also on Facebook and Twitter. I read your Twitter feed every day, Michael. You come out with great stuff every day. I don't know how you do it, but thank you for doing it, because it's been very enlightening to me. And you have been a very huge influence in my understanding in the whole world of exopolitics. And I think you're doing a wonderful service to all of us in helping to understand this sometimes very thorny issue. And really enjoyed our talk today. Thank you again for having me on and allowing this discussion.
Well, thank you, Brad, and for your courage as well in being able to go into faraway places, visit all these really exotic locations, and to be able to kind of get to the truth about some very difficult topics and putting that out through your books. So thank you, Brad, and aloha.
Aloha.